Hey, Dr. Tammy here. I have a very interesting video for you tonight, and I have a show called The Naked Doctor Show, and it's the naked truth about health, lifestyle, and wellness. So I want to do a lifestyle video tonight, and I want to talk about a topic that has been a real challenge for me throughout my whole life, and that is boundaries. And everybody's heard of boundaries, you know, a fence around your yard is a boundary. Everybody's got boundaries. But sometimes it feels very unclear what your boundaries are, and how you know if you have boundary issues is when you feel like you're out of control, when you feel like you have a hard time making decisions, when you feel like you don't want to make decisions, when you feel like when other people make decisions, you're not in the loop. And so, you know, one of the challenges I had was my husband is very proactive in business. He's an entrepreneur. He's always making decisions and moving forward. And one of the things that I realized was I was getting very frustrated, and sometimes I felt like I was out of the loop on things. And I was always accusing him of, "You're not including me." And he would ask me things, and I wouldn't really feel comfortable giving him my opinion. And then when he would do things, because he's very motivated, he's very driven, very ambitious, I would feel like a victim. I would be like, "Why aren't you including me in those things? Why are you making those decisions without me?" So one of the things that I realized is because I had issues with boundaries. Now I want to go back just a little bit, and I want to tell you one of the most profound realizations that I had, and this was probably about 5-6 years ago. I had a lady one time who told me about this book, and it's a religious book. It's a Christian-based book, and it's called Boundaries: When to Say Yes and When to Say No. And it's by a couple of, I want to say brothers, but McLeod is the main author. And I read this book, and it absolutely changed my life. But, you know, words don't teach, experience teaches. And so I had to have the experience over the next few years to really teach me what boundaries were, and that I had issues with forming boundaries. And I used to always tell people, just make the decision for me. You know, if we're going to go out to eat as friends, I would never say where I wanted to go. And I would use the excuse that, you know, I'm a doctor, I was in residency, we had to make literally thousands of decisions a day, you know, life or death decisions, and I just got tired of making decisions all the time. Well, it's interesting because in the medical world, I learned to make decisions very quickly, life or death decisions, and I had very clear boundaries. And I learned that in the medical world, in the hospital, I had to have those boundaries because it was life or death. And, you know, one of the first codes that I ever ran to when I was a new resident, I remember the respiratory therapist and some of the other nurses and stuff were running the code, and I got to the code, and I had to be kind of an absolute jerk because they weren't even paying attention to me. And I thought, you know, maybe it's because I'm a female, maybe it's because I'm new here, and I had to just kind of be kind of a jerk, and I had to say, I'm the physician here, I'm responsible for this patient, you guys, you know, and just move them out of the way and take control of the code. So I learned to do that in the medical world, but I really didn't learn to do that in my life, in my relationships, and it's caused numerous problems. So if you have problems or you feel like people bully you in your life, or you feel like, you know, I think that whole thing about narcissists is interesting. I've had so many patients tell me they're married to narcissists, and it's just, you know, they're just a big old victim in that. And I would say that there are no adult victims. There are no adult abuse victims. If you're in a bad situation, get out. Find some help, you know. And so if you feel like there's someone in your life who's a boundary bully, who's always going over your boundaries, it's your responsibility to take control of your life. And the first thing is to realize that maybe you're a boundary victim. So rather than put this on the bully or the boundary bully or having a narcissist in your life, is to take responsibility for being the boundary victim, or for being, you know, for not really recognizing your boundaries. I'm going to make sure I'm recording real quick. Okay, cool. So one of the things that I think that you need to understand is what boundaries are. And when I first read that book by Dr. McLeod, I was very I wanted to please, and I'm going to talk about your boundary blueprint in just a minute, but I wanted to please. And so as a female growing up in a very kind of dictatorial kind of home, my dad was very patriarch, you know, and very in control. I didn't really ever learn to express myself. And so I didn't realize that I had a problem expressing my boundaries. When I read that book, it actually gave me biblical permission to set boundaries, and that it's actually a loving thing to do. And I remember one of my patients that I shared this book with actually became one of our health coaches. And I remember that she was having trouble with family members because they were like, she felt like they were stepping all over her, taking advantage of her, like nothing in her life is going right. Even her own children were taking advantage of her. And I said, you need to read this book, Boundaries. And she did. And we talked about it's okay to say no. In fact, sometimes your no is more valuable than your yes. And one of the things I've learned that my beautiful husband, Brian, has taught me through dealing with especially traumatized or difficult children is that setting healthy boundaries, they need that, they want that. And if you're a parent who's kind of loosey-goosey and you are a boundary victim, or you've never set good boundaries for yourself in your past, and you don't set good boundaries for your children, you will constantly feel like they're bullying you, and it will compromise your relationship with your children. And then when they're adult children, you'll still continue to feel compromised or bullied, or kind of shamed into making decisions and things like that from your children. So learning good boundaries is super, super important. So I want to talk about some different kinds of boundaries. The first one is a physical boundary, and this is your kind of comfort zone with yourself, shaking hands, hugging. These can be sexual boundaries. This can be your personal space. Everybody kind of knows about personal space. One of the problems with autism is that sometimes people with autism need more personal space, and sometimes they don't always respect others' personal space as much. They'll kind of move in a little too close. We all know those people that you feel awkward around because they just stand a little too close. So you have to be able to identify your personal boundaries, and it's okay to say to people, I'm kind of awkward and I kind of like a little more personal space. Or in a relationship, hey, I like to really get to know somebody before I engage in anything more, romantic. And so it's okay to say those things. And some women find themselves getting into trouble when they have problems with their boundary blueprints, because they start dating, they want to be liked, they want to be nice, and then there's like this heavy petting that's going on, and you want to be liked and you want to be nice, and then next thing you know, you're not comfortable, but you don't want to say no, and you find yourself compromised. So it's really good to talk about healthy boundaries with your children, and to know that boundaries are okay, that they're safe, that they're good to have. Shaking hands. I hate shaking hands. I don't know if that's kind of an autism thing with me, but I'm a germaphobe, and I start thinking about all the germs and stuff, and so I'm really awkward with shaking hands. I'd rather hug you than shake your hand, and hugging is so much more affectionate and personal to me. So everybody knows me, knows I'm more of a hugger. I really don't like to shake hands, especially if I've just washed my hands and I'm getting ready to eat. So I can be really awkward with that. But it's okay to have those physical boundaries, and people who know you will respect those. Then there's mental boundaries, which are your thoughts, values, and opinions. You do not have to apologize for your thoughts, your values, or opinions ever. Now I'm saying that with the thought that it's good to have an open mind, because I'm constantly learning new things. I'm learning new values and new opinions, and I'm learning to realize that a lot of those blueprints that I've learned from, my family don't always serve me. And so a lot of it's just from social and historical experience. So I'm trying to be more open-minded and not judgmental, but I don't have to apologize for the way I feel about things. And so sometimes I'm a little bit weak with my boundaries there, because people will say, express their opinion about something, and I'll have an opinion about something, but sometimes it's easier, or sometimes it's even better to be happy than to be right? So it doesn't mean you always have to express your opinions, but you don't have to apologize for your opinions, and it's okay to have your opinions. And if someone doesn't like your opinion, it's okay to say, hey, I totally get it that you don't agree with my opinion. We'll just agree to disagree, right? And it's okay to clean house. It's okay to have an inventory of relationships when they're not working for you, to say, hey, that doesn't feel good to me anymore. I just recently have a friend that I thought she was a very close, dear friend, and kind of got into a work situation together, and I really kind of saw some of her true colors, and I thought, you know what? My life is so simple. I don't need that. I just kind of don't respond to any text. I'm not going to get into any drama. I don't need to apologize for it. It's just who I am. And so that was a really good boundary setting experience for me. And even on Facebook, I think of Facebook as my backyard. And so if you don't like my opinions, then unfriend me, go away. Don't just be nasty and negative, because I will unfriend you and block you. I don't want you pooping in my backyard, and I won't allow it. I have better boundaries than that. And to me, that is my personal space, and I don't have to, and you don't have to either. So if people are being nasty or negative, you don't have to put up with that, and you don't have to make excuses for it. Are you easily suggestible? Do you always kind of wait for other people to give their opinions first? That means that you are either a boundary victim or you have weak blueprints for your boundaries. So if you're always kind of waiting for other people to have an opinion first, or you're kind of afraid to express your opinion, and I'm not saying, I don't think everybody should be expressing all their negative opinions about things, but if you're in a close, loving relationship with a spouse or with a child or sister or friend, you should feel completely open to express any way you feel about anything in that setting. So I'm not saying that you should be able to go post that on someone else's social media if you don't agree with them, but if you have your own boundary issues, then you're going to be easily suggestible, and you're going to have trouble making decisions. And like I say, I made the excuse that I just make too many decisions at work all day long. I don't want to make them at home. But I realized with my husband that I had really weak boundaries. And so he'd say, where do you want to go for dinner? And sometimes I would actually suggest something, and he'd be like, oh, you always want to go there. And I'd be like, oh, he doesn't like that place, or he doesn't, I didn't like the way that felt when he would say that. And so because my boundaries were really weak, I'd be like, well, wherever you want to go, honey. And he didn't mean it bad at all, but I was totally projecting that he was a bully. And so I'm like, fine, I'm never going to suggest any place ever again. And that's not what he was trying to do. So I was making him out to be a boundary bully when really I was the problem. I was the one with the weak boundaries. And I should have just said, hey, if you don't want to go there, hey, let's go where I want to go this time. We'll go where you want to go next time. Or we'll get, and sometimes he's kind of funny, because like when our family wants to go different places, sometimes we'll go through 4 different drive-thrus to get what everybody wants. So he's not a boundary bully, but I have a weakness in my boundary blueprint. So I had to recognize that. Okay, and emotional boundaries or your feelings. So again, this is one little bit deeper layer, but sometimes people who have weak emotional blueprints for emotional boundaries, they don't even feel adequate having feelings. And so, it's really interesting. I kind of had an epiphany the other night, and I told my husband that what happens is we have thoughts which become feelings. That's an arrow. Which become feelings, which become hormonal chemical changes. Of course, I got to talk about hormones somewhere in here, right? Chemical changes. And sometimes we can call this stress, we can call this cortisol, we can call this imbalances in our hormone system. But I always thought that the thoughts create the feelings. But here's the deal. Sometimes you have the feeling first because you've got these neurohormonal chemical changes, or maybe you've just practiced these feelings so much that you don't even know how to feel good sometimes, or maybe you don't get enough sleep, or you don't have something physically supporting having good feelings, so you're tired or you're grumpy. And then oftentimes you'll find thoughts to support those feelings. So you'll start thinking obsessive negative thoughts to support that. Now that's a really subtle difference, so I hope you can hear that, because I've always said that the thoughts create the feelings, and that's true, but sometimes the feelings create the thoughts. So if you are feeling bad or you're in a nasty space, you'll start to create the thoughts around that. So you have the choice to stop and pause. I'm going to talk about how to set healthy boundaries in just a minute. But you absolutely have the choice to stop and pause and say, am I hungry? Am I tired? Am I grumpy? Is this my time of month? What's going on with me? Because I don't feel good. And I'm just thinking a lot of nasty thoughts. So I'm going to go do something to help me feel better. I'm going to take a bath. I'm going to eat something healthy. I'm going to do something to help me feel better. And then I'm going to start thinking some thoughts. Maybe you go meditate for a little bit to clear your head, or, do something with those thoughts, because what you'll do is you'll continue to create thoughts to support those feelings. It's kind of like the brain has these habits. It gets on autopilot, and it keeps wanting to kind of go back to baseline. So you'll start thinking all these nasty thoughts because you're feeling bad, and you'll start thinking, well, my husband's a bully, or, my son's bullying me, and my son's making demands on me that don't feel good, or, they won't do their homework, and you start obsessing, or I don't have enough money, or I don't have the car I want, and you'll start thinking all these really horrible thoughts that support the feeling. So you have to recognize that thoughts create feelings, but feelings also create thoughts. You get that? Really important aspect. So, okay, let's talk about your boundary blueprint real quick, and because you have to understand this before you can start setting healthy boundaries. And the first thing you have to do is go back to your childhood and look at your family dynamics and how you guys set boundaries when you were a kid. So the first thing is, in your family, how did they communicate? And did they set clear boundaries? And were you allowed to express yourself? And were you allowed to express yourself when they were feeling good or when they weren't feeling good? What were the circumstances where you were allowed to express yourself? And were you encouraged to express your feelings? You know, my husband talks a lot about traumatized kids and thoughts and feelings and emotions, and that oftentimes our feelings are suppressed because, like, a kid gets frustrated and they roll their eyes. Were you allowed to roll your eyes when you were a kid? I wasn't. And so I wasn't really allowed to express my feelings because that was interpreted as disrespectful. So I wasn't allowed to express when I didn't want to do something. And so I felt, because I was a pleaser and a girl and a caretaker, you know, my dad was sick a lot and I had to take care of him. I had terrible boundaries. Looking back on my boundary blueprint, I was not allowed to have my own opinions. I was encouraged to be successful, which is why I'm probably successful today, but I was not encouraged to have good boundaries, and I had terrible boundaries. In fact, you know, just to be real with you, I found myself in many circumstances as a young adult where my sexual boundaries were very blurred, and I would get in the car with boys because I didn't want to disappoint them. I could have gotten killed or raped or anything. You know, through the grace of God, I was protected. But I think back on some of those situations where I just, you know, or I drank some alcohol when I really didn't want to. I never got into drugs or anything, but because that was kind of a big no-no. So, you know, I had some boundaries just clearly out of fear because I knew my parents would probably beat me. And I wasn't sexually promiscuous because I knew my dad would kill me if I got pregnant. So the only boundaries that I really knew how to set were out of fear. I wasn't encouraged to make boundaries out of good, healthy choices. So I don't know where you were, but you know, a lot of times with our family dynamic, my dad was very sick. We were in survival mode a lot. And so we didn't communicate well. My mom worked nights. My dad was sick a lot. And we were just in survival mode. So I was never taught clear communication. My mom hid things from my dad. You know, God bless them. They were just doing the best they could. My dad, you know, had tons of emotional issues. So it's a wonder that I learned any good boundaries at all. So if you're in that situation, you know, I'm not trying to, oh, poor me, or get you to feel sorry for me. I'm just telling you that if you've struggled with your family blueprint and you were in survival mode and, you know, you never learned to set good boundaries, that's probably from your family dynamics. And it's okay. Everybody is exactly where they're supposed to be. You're not broken. You don't need fixed. I'm just telling you that if you want your life to look a little different and you want to stop feeling like a victim, you want to feel like you're actually capable of making decisions to move your life forward, you have to make some different choices. So what are those choices? Well, let's talk about making those choices and healthy boundaries. Number one is identify how you feel and understand that you probably don't even know how you feel because you have never practiced setting good boundaries before. So one of the things that you can do is ask yourself, how am I feeling right now? Because remember I said thoughts can create feelings or feelings can create thoughts. Am I thinking bad thoughts first and then that's creating bad feelings, or am I feeling bad? Am I in pain? Am I tired? Am I hungry? And that's creating bad thoughts. So recognize how you feel first. Number two, pause. It's okay to stop and think. If somebody asks you something, it's okay to say, you know what, I need to think about it. I always like it when people are decision makers and they can come up with a decision. If I call somebody and say, hey, you want to go out to the lake Saturday? I love it when they go, let me think. Yeah, I got this and this and this. Yeah, I can go Saturday. That's great. And that when they follow through, I'm like, that's perfect. But you know what? If it's someone who is a weak boundary setter or has problems with boundaries, I would much rather them say, you know what? I have problems with boundaries sometimes, and I don't know that that really fits into everything that I've got going on. So I would rather just tell you, let me get back to you. And then I can say, okay, tell me a timeline when you can get back to me so that I can make other plans or whatever. And, you know, it's also your responsibility as someone who is friends with or love someone who is a weak boundary setter, to help them through this process and recognize that and be kind to them and say, you know what, take all the time you need. If that doesn't work for you, that's just great. And to support them, because sometimes if you do have a true boundary bully or a narcissist in your life, sometimes they will be very pushy with you, and it is okay. You don't have to make any apologies to say, you know what, I need some time to think about this. Breathe, check your schedule, do the pros and cons. It's okay to do that. You don't want to overthink it too much, but you know, it is okay for you to say, I need some time to think, until you get clear about making decisions. Use I statements, and that means to say, I don't feel like going Saturday, or I would rather go to the lake on, you know, I'd rather go to a movie on Saturday than the lake. It's okay to say these I statements rather than to put it off on them, to say things like, you're such a bully, or you never let me make the decisions. It's better to say, I'd like to make this decision and this would feel good to me, and to keep it in the I statements. Number 4 is be clear what you want. And one of the biggest signs that you are a weak boundary blueprinter is if you feel like you're not clear what you want. So I would say take some time, recognize your boundary blueprints, start thinking about what it is that you want in your life, what you want out of your relationships. Do a vision board, you know, think in general terms first, and then kind of come down to what it is you want, in relationships. And then, you know, if you want to be more of a decision maker, talk with the people around you that love you and support you, and say, you know, I've not always been good about making good, clear boundaries, but I'd like to be better in the future, and I'd really like it if you'd support me. A lot of communication goes a long ways. You know, I always tell people when I meet them, if I'm going to be in close relationship, that I'm kind of awkward. Part of it's probably because of being on the autistic spectrum, and that sometimes my boundary, you know, like some of these things are a little awkward, and sometimes socially or emotionally I can be a little awkward, and that I struggle with boundaries, and that sometimes, you know, that might get in the way of what they think sometimes. So I kind of let them know, and it makes our relationship so much smoother. But consistency is the key, and you know, you're not going to be perfect at this. You got to practice it and let people know, hey, I'm going to be practicing this, and just keep doing it. Take some inventory of the people in your life that are, you know, the best suited to be supportive for you in this. And you can do this. You can absolutely be a more powerful boundary setter. And it is vital and essential to a good, well-healed, healthy life, because stress, or perceived stress, and being weak and feeling like you can't make decisions and like you're a victim all the time, leads to neurohormonal chemical changes that are not positive, and then you'll end up coming to see me to have to get your hormones balanced or something. So it's really all a comprehensive picture. I just want you to have the best, most healed, well life possible, and I wish you all the best. I love you very much, and I just want you to set healthy boundaries and feel good about your life. Make good decisions, and feel good about the decisions that you make. So recognize your blueprint and go from there. I do these Facebook Lives every day. If you've stayed on this long, please click the share button and show some love. Tell your friends that I do this. Watch our Naked Doctor show. It's on 3 times a week, and I will see you all tomorrow. Mwah.